The guy gave her a ride back to her place, making certain she got indoors safely. Once the automated garage clicked completely closed, he finally drove off. At least, that was the exact narrative Tomaso Tioni handed over to the detectives. It is the identical version of events he stuck to right from the initial second the cops showed up at his front step. Just a completely uneventful night featuring a standard ride back. Simply a guy helping out his wife's mother. Completely normal family stuff. There was zero out of the ordinary. Absolutely nothing that would stick in your memory. It seemed completely typical for a Thursday evening out in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson, Arizona, right up until 4 hours passed by. Because right around 1:47 a.m., somebody hiding behind a mask casually strolled directly onto the entryway of that exact residence, stared straight down the lens of the security cam, and deliberately cut the power to the device. After that moment, nobody ever laid eyes on Nancy Guthrie again. Look, I really want to make this perfectly clear before we dive any deeper into this timeline. The details we are about to unpack are completely free of guesswork. We are not looking at wild internet message board conspiracies, nor are we dealing with those frantic viral internet whispers that blow up online well before the actual facts get checked. Each piece of information presented in this deep dive is pulled straight out of the verified paperwork filed by the Pima County Sheriff's Office, authenticated statements released by the FBI, cross-checked laboratory timelines, and massive stacks of federal case files. Furthermore, the moment you line up these facts next to each other sequentially, making absolutely sure no tiny crumb gets ignored, the final picture that emerges happens to be something the major television networks completely lack the attention span, or maybe the guts, to properly broadcast. Let us lay it all out for you. The date is February 1st, 2026. You will find the Catalina foothills tucked right into the northernmost boundary of Tucson, practically leaning right on the lower slopes of the Santa Catalina mountain range. Properties in this zip code sit a mile away from the asphalt. Sprawling acreage, massive brick perimeters. Exactly the sort of upscale community where some random vehicle parked outside with the engine running would instantly draw suspicion. The entire area was built to offer this illusion of being perfectly sheltered and secure, a deeply ingrained silence that requires years to establish and just expects to remain completely unbroken forever. Right around 1:47 in the morning, that peace shatters completely. The security lens mounted to a one-floor residence out in those very hills suddenly picks up someone approaching. Looks to be a guy, roughly 5'9" to 5'10" in height. Pretty standard body type. His face is completely hidden by winter headgear, and he has practically wrapped himself in several thick pieces of clothing stacked on top of each other. It was a physical outline purposely stuffed with extra padding, faking a much heavier frame. All completely engineered to throw off the cops and hide his true shape. Strapped behind him was a dark 25-liter Ozark Trail camping bag, shoved carelessly right down the front of his trousers. Totally lacking any proper carrying rig, rested a handgun jutting out clumsily against his stomach. The guy never hesitates for a second. Without ever checking his blind spots, he marches straight up to the security tech, locks eyes with the glass, and manually rips the system offline. This was not some random short circuit or a blown fuse. It was completely intentional. The visual cuts out instantly. The entryway fades to black. Everything that unfolds over the next moments takes place in absolute stillness. Entirely off the grid since not a single electronic eye remained active on the premises. After that, 41 long minutes tick away. 41 solid minutes of absolute emptiness. Zero frantic yells. Not a single police cruiser wailing. Zero indoor lamps flicking on next door. No barking hounds anywhere. Simply the heavy isolation of the desert, wrapping around the location entirely. Meanwhile, deep within the walls of that structure, events were unfolding that the local authorities have flat out failed to piece together properly. This exact moment is the reason why Tomaso Tioni ends up completely anchoring the entire narrative. To be clear, it is not due to any official criminal indictments against him, nor have the detectives ever officially branded him the primary target. Rather, it all boils down to the hard scientific paper trail left behind. From the locked-in electronic clocks and cyber footprint to the incredibly deep psychological breakdown of how that masked person moved on tape. The exact phrasing utilized inside the extortion letters, right down to the microscopic DNA swabs pulled directly off the main doorway. Anytime you start yanking on one of these loose ends, they eventually drag you right back to a single destination. Straight back to the final individual known to have laid eyes on Nancy Guthrie while she was still breathing. Directly back to the very same guy who gave her a lift home, stared intently at the motorized garage coming down, and hit the road. Our plan right now is to march straight through this mountain of proof. Step by step, we are about to lay out 5 massive scientific red flags for you. 5 extremely concrete, heavily logged, and fully verified pieces of the puzzle that blow the whole organized abduction theory right out of the water. Furthermore, I can personally guarantee that once we hit that 5th major point, the narrative, the evening news shoved down your throat during those opening 72 hours is going to look like complete fiction. However, before we jump right into the deep end, if you happen to be stopping by this channel for the first time, a huge welcome to the Case Files Collective. The work we produce over here goes way beyond simple recaps. We absolutely refuse to deal in baseless gossip. Nor do we desperately spin half-baked facts just to make things sound a bit more cinematic. Instead, we dig aggressively straight into the paperwork. We spend hours poring over the actual crime scene data. We track the cybercrimes absolutely everywhere they naturally progress. Every single mystery we dive into is anchored exclusively by completely authenticated records. Consequently, whenever we finally land on a verdict, it is entirely rooted in what the official paperwork actually proves. We never add fluff, and we never leave anything crucial out. So, if that style of relentless digging is exactly why you clicked, go ahead and smash that subscribe button immediately. And definitely ring the notification bell. We are constantly rolling out fresh mysteries every single week, and our incredible viewer base never fails to tune in for the latest drop. All right. Keep your focus completely locked here because we are officially starting the timeline. And it kicks off directly with Tomaso Tioni, right as the sun went down on Saturday, January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie was over hanging out at the residence shared by her kid, Annie, along with Annie's spouse, Tomaso Tioni. To be honest, this family get-together was a completely regular thing. Tomaso actually teaches advanced placement biology over at Basis Oro Valley, located in Tucson, maintaining his position at that specific campus for easily over 15 years. Hailing originally from Italy and holding serious academic credentials, his fellow faculty members always painted him as an incredibly calculated, level-headed, and intensely focused individual. He and Annie Guthrie had been happily hitched for a long time. Basically, he functioned as, from any outside perspective looking in at his daily routine, the rock of the household and a super considerate guy to his wife's folks, simply a dude who lacked zero obvious motives to ever act out of character. As that specific night rolled on, the trio consisting of Nancy, Annie, and Tomaso just hung back and killed some time inside the Tioni property. The exact details of what they actually chatted about, the specific words tossed around, or even the general vibe in the room during that dinner. The official records don't offer any clues about whether the atmosphere felt off that evening. However, we have rock-solid proof detailing exactly what occurred when she decided to head out. At 9:48 at night, Tomaso Tioni drove his wife's mother back to her residence, nestled in the Catalina foothills. Upon arriving at the property, he made certain she safely got indoors. The garage door shut tight at precisely 9:50 that evening. Silence washed over the driveway and the surrounding block as Tomaso headed out. That specific minute, 9:50 at night, on the 31st of January, 2026, marks the absolute final verified instance of Nancy Guthrie being secure in her house. Right as that door shut and his vehicle vanished from sight, this brings us to a crucial piece of physical evidence that casts a massive shadow over all the subsequent events. At 84 years of age, the woman still had a remarkably crisp mind and paid close attention to everything around her. Everyone who knew her described someone completely active in her day-to-day routine until the exact second she went missing. On a bodily level, though, she suffered from severe movement issues creating a delicate health status that plays a massive role in unraveling this mystery. Relying on heart pills every single day meant that skipping even one 24-hour cycle could trigger a fatal emergency, a fact authorities openly acknowledged. An internal pacemaker was also hard at work, keeping her heartbeat steady and regular. This medical implant synced wirelessly to a health program on her Apple smartphone. Every evening, that mobile device sat right next to her bed, provided she stayed close enough to maintain that wireless link, regardless of which room she wandered into. The internal mechanism seamlessly communicated with the handset. The software tracked her vitals constantly, meaning it caught the exact second she stepped out of range and dropped the signal. Her programs saved that data, providing an absolute time-stamped piece of undeniable proof. Based on expert digital breakdowns, the wireless link tethering her chest piece to her mobile dropped at 2:28 in the morning. Meanwhile, the surveillance system went dark earlier, at 1:47 after midnight. That leaves us with 41 minutes of unaccounted time. When the 1st of February rolled around, someone from her local parish realized she never logged on to their regular online worship broadcast. Relatives got the call shortly after. Cameron and Annie showed up at the property, let themselves in, and immediately spotted her mobile. All of her everyday items were sitting right there, but their mother was gone. Around noon, they dialed 911. Upon stepping foot inside the property, local county deputies uncovered something that sent the situation into overdrive almost immediately. Detectives were already treating it as a murder by the next sunrise, prompting federal agents to join the hunt. Border Patrol brought out their search teams, turning this into a massive national operation. Right in the middle of this chaos stood the final individual confirmed to have laid eyes on her breathing, the guy who brought her home just 4 hours prior to the surveillance system shutting down. Tomaso Tioni. Put yourself in the shoes of a detective for a second, standing right there in her living room. Crime scene techs just gave you the exact digital footprint from her heart monitor. Someone intentionally wiped out the security video. You are staring down 41 missing minutes that feel exactly like a sealed vault, without a combination. Furthermore, there is zero doubt in your mind about who interacted with her last. Your immediate focus would go straight to him, which is exactly where the feds aimed their spotlight. We will reveal their discoveries shortly. Some ladies craft an existence with such understated grace and routine that their loved ones simply exist within it, never realizing the immense effort it takes to maintain. It becomes as expected as the foundation of your childhood home. You never question its strength until a sudden tremor shakes the entire structure. That perfectly describes Nancy Guthrie. The 84-year-old spent her days independently in an immaculately maintained one-level house tucked into the Tucson, Arizona hills. This community hugs the bottom of the Santa Catalina Range, known for its arid climate and deeply tranquil nights that longtime residents absolutely cherish. She thrived within that exact peace. Flashy drama and loud behavior simply weren't her style. Instead, she anchored herself in steadfast habits, designing a beautifully subdued reality over 80 solid years. She raised a trio of kids, including her oldest girl, Savannah Guthrie. You probably recognize her as a mainstay host on the NBC Today program, a familiar presence greeting viewers across the country every single morning. Her other girl, Annie, spent time running marketing campaigns alongside crafting jewelry and writing poetry. But Nancy's rigid schedule wasn't just a sweet quirk, it ultimately became critical investigative proof. The very second she ghosted her virtual Sunday worship on February 1st, 2026, red flags immediately went flying. No burglar alarms went off, and no locals reported anything suspicious. Instead, a break in her unwavering routine and a haunting quiet spoke volumes. As detectives would soon learn, that missing activity served as the initial clue pointing toward a complete nightmare unfolding within those walls. At this point, we need to dive into the specifics of her property, since the area's actual terrain holds massive weight for the police work. These properties rest high up in the mountains. Every single plot is sprawling, with houses tucked far away from the road. The community was built for absolute privacy, making it nearly impossible for an outsider to simply stroll through without raising eyebrows. If a random vehicle idles outside at 2 in the morning, someone is absolutely going to spot it. The locals pay close attention to their surroundings, amplifying just how disturbing the total quiet of that evening truly was. Not a single soul caught on to what was happening. You didn't have neighbors calling in suspicious cars. Not a single dog barked in the distance. And the surrounding houses stayed completely dark. Even the local traffic cams and home security setups across the block failed to pick up any hard proof. Considering this was a community that prided itself on staying vigilant and keeping watch, the late hours stretching from January 31st into the 1st of February yielded absolutely zero physical traces on the outside. The events that unfolded right inside Nancy Guthrie's walls that evening were totally managed, kept under wraps, and completely hidden from anyone walking past her porch. This gave detectives a massive clue, since keeping a lid on things that tightly is never just a coincidence. Pulling that off means you either caught an insane lucky break or you intimately understood the turf, familiarizing yourself with the floor plan and grasping exactly how the local block operated day to day. You would need to map out the security lenses, figure out exactly whose doorbell picked up which avenue, and trace the exact blind spots of every motion light next door. It is the exact type of intel an outsider spends weeks digging up, or the kind of insight a relative already holds in their back pocket. This brings us to a crucial point about her actual medical standing, which is the absolute key to unlocking what the crime scene data reveals about that night. At 84 years of age, she was far from the weak, helpless stereotype people usually jump to. Her mind was incredibly clear, and she missed absolutely nothing. Friends and acquaintances painted a picture of a fiercely active, outspoken lady who always had her finger on the pulse. Physically speaking, however, she was fighting a whole different battle. Medical records showed clear physical restraints that made getting around her own living space a genuine struggle. Her heart relied completely on a very strict, everyday prescription routine just to keep pumping properly. Detectives openly stated that missing those pills for just over 24 hours would quickly snowball into a life-or-death health crisis. On top of that, she had a pacemaker installed, this tiny internal mechanism responsible for pacing her heartbeats in a steady sequence, wirelessly synced straight to a health app on her smartphone. Each and every evening, that cell rested right on her bedside table, only an arm's length away whenever she was home, perfectly within the typical 30-foot wireless connectivity bubble. As a result, the digital link bridging her chest implant and her mobile device stayed constantly alive. The software meticulously tracked her cardiovascular stats second by second, never dropping a beat. But the split second that pairing severed, the very instant she was taken too far from the handset, the program flagged it. It dropped an exact timestamp right into the system's history. That pinpointed mark was 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, 2026. Meanwhile, the front porch lens got shut down at 1:47 a.m. Exactly 41 minutes sit between those two markers. Within that tight 41-minute window, locked inside a residence with an 84-year-old lady incapable of fleeing, unable to defend herself, and whose eventual no-show at Sunday worship would ultimately trigger the panic button. An event took place that authorities are still desperately trying to piece together and confirm to this very day. There happens to be a particular aspect of Nancy's background that the media quickly highlighted and then completely ignored, totally missing its real weight. Her kid, Annie, was far from just a casual guest dropping by. Both she and her spouse, Tomaso Tioni, were deeply integrated into the daily routine. They made constant house calls and shared family meals all the time. Honestly, they handled the nitty-gritty details of her schedule, just like most grown kids do when looking after their elderly folks. They bridged the tricky divide between an older mother wanting to live free and the actual heavy lifting needed to make that happen. That tight bond is super important here. It essentially proves that Tomaso was never just some guy lingering in the background of Nancy Guthrie's universe. He was a permanent fixture, enjoying unrestricted entry to her property, intimately knowing her habits, her timetable, and every street corner in the area. He was perfectly aware of when she'd be flying solo. The guy memorized her pill timings and knew exactly where her cell rested at night. He had her sleep cycles down to a science and could calculate precisely how many hours would pass before anyone noticed she was missing. We aren't pointing fingers here. We're just laying out the objective facts. Plus, These are the exact sorts of clues that government detectives take extremely seriously and refuse to just brush under the rug. See, when the Pima County authorities first launched their probe into Nancy's vanishing act, they didn't immediately hunt for a motive. Their opening query was way more basic and hit much closer to home. They started with the classic baseline of any solid case: who actually possessed the brains and the background to pull this off? And the response to that, backed by hard data and precise digital footprints, points straight to the porch of the final individual to lay eyes on Nancy Guthrie while she was still breathing. The very guy who brought her home stood by as the bay doors shut and sped off into the blackness. The deep dive into Tomaso Tioni's life was officially kicking off. And like any major police inquiry, they weren't about to tiptoe around it. You see, the authorities have a special label for the guy whose whereabouts put him right next to the target exactly when things went south. The cops avoid using flashy or sensational buzzwords to describe this status. They lean on a very sterile, highly calculated expression. They officially dub them a person of interest. From the very second Nancy Guthrie's relatives dialed 911, authorities had their eyes fixed firmly on Tomaso Tioni. Detectives didn't possess any hard proof pointing his way yet, nor had a single soul pointed fingers in his direction. Rather, standard investigative procedure inevitably zeroed in right away on whoever was verified to have seen her right before she went missing. That final interaction came with an identity, a recognizable appearance, and a 10-digit cell number which Pima County deputies rang up shortly after taking the initial report. The guy was named Tomaso Tioni, and at first glance, his background seemed entirely ordinary. Originally from Italy, and estimated to be somewhere around his late 40s or early 50s, he immigrated to America and settled down in Tucson, a laid-back town where taking things slow and keeping your head down really pays off. He landed a job teaching advanced placement biology at Basis Oro Valley, which stands as one of the most prestigious charter academies across Arizona. He had been employed at that campus for more than 15 years. 15 straight years pacing the exact same floors, covering the exact same curriculum, and educating fresh batches of kids as each fall rolled around. Those aren't the details of someone leading a dangerous, unpredictable existence. Rather, they describe a guy who craved a steady routine, putting down deep roots and never leaving. He tied the knot with Annie Guthrie, a poetry writer and jewelry maker whose mother he eventually chauffeured back from a meal during what ended up being her final, peaceful evening. From an outside perspective, the couple shared a healthy, active partnership, constantly showing up for one another just as they consistently showed up for Nancy. The trio hung out all the time, sharing meals and dropping by each other's places in the typical rhythm of a tight-knit clan living close by. However, that sheer normalcy is precisely why the sequence of events became impossible to brush off, laying out a very specific chain of facts. On January 31st, 2026, at 9:48 in the evening, Tioni dropped the elderly woman off after she visited his place, making sure she got indoors securely before her garage shut firmly at 9:50. Following his departure, a gap of 4 hours and roughly 57 minutes passed until someone wearing a face covering showed up on her front porch lens, physically cutting the video signal before stepping inside. The wireless link syncing the victim's heart device to her smartphone, which served as her sole uninterrupted digital tracking method, suddenly dropped at 2:28 in the morning. Just like that, the woman had completely vanished. A time frame spanning roughly 4 hours exists between 9:50 at night and 1:47 in the morning, a period where she remained completely by herself indoors. Throughout those 4 hours, detectives haven't been able to find a single piece of evidence suggesting anybody reached out or spoke to her. That 4-hour gap hangs over the formal police reports with unbearable tension. So put yourself in the shoes of someone trying to piece this mystery together. Imagine you're a government agent sitting on a mountain of call histories, computer histories, and GPS tracking coordinates, alongside an exact chronological breakdown nailed down perfectly. Knowing full well the final individual to see her alive drove away exactly at 9:50 at night. An incident goes down at 1:47 in the morning, and the guy in question happens to be the son-in-law of the missing woman. This same guy can pop into her place whenever he wants, understands her everyday habits perfectly, knows the surrounding streets inside out, and has the floor plan completely memorized. He is fully aware of where the security lenses point, when she takes her pills, and exactly how an 84-year-old lady goes about her evenings all by herself. How do you begin your probe? You kick things off right at that spot. Guaranteed. No questions asked. Pima County law enforcement followed that exact playbook on the 1st of February, 2026, by reaching out to speak with the teacher. Officers immediately kicked off the tedious task of piecing together an extensive digital and physical map tracking everywhere he went and everyone he talked to, completely analyzing his electronic history during the window Nancy went missing. And let me tell you, this wasn't just some friendly chat down at the local diner. This involved a highly calculated, step-by-step inquiry run by a precinct that upgraded the situation to a suspected felony less than 24 hours after the 911 dial. Then, the 5th of February rolled around. 4 days past her vanishing. Cops showed up at the couple's doorstep, clutching a judge-signed document giving them full permission to toss the place. The officers didn't just gently tap on the door asking for a quick peek. They swarmed the yard in large groups and stormed the interior, meaning business. Teams swept from room to room, sporting surgical hand protection, following strict guidelines to make sure no potential clues got contaminated. Those gloves sent a clear message that every single object they handled, from the countertops to the storage cabinets, and all the electronics sitting around the property, could end up logged in a major government case file, keeping the crew occupied indoors for hours on end. Meanwhile, press crews camped out along the pavement, recorded whatever action they could spot from the curb, blasting the clips across nationwide television while the web, already obsessing over the mystery like a pack of amateur sleuths, convinced they could crack it quicker than actual detectives, completely blew up. Message boards caught fire immediately, with users spending hours posting side-by-side images comparing the husband's body type to the blurry porch video, heavily scrutinizing his tallness, his frame, the way he stood, and even the tiny bits of stubble peeking out from behind the intruder's disguise. The public wasn't just whispering theories. They were actively playing judge and jury using fuzzy screenshots and wild guesses, acting as arrogantly as folks who have never actually been involved in a legal trial. However, those online threads missed a crucial detail, and the frantic tweeting completely overlooked the fact that the February 5th raid wouldn't be the final sweep. Fast forward 3 days to the 7th of February, and the cops showed back up holding another approved order, sending a fresh squad of protected hands carefully picking through the residence again, except when they finally exited. The officers hauled out items that caused every single true crime reporter on the scene to completely lose their train of thought. A bunch of paper collection sacks alongside a highly specific metallic lockbox meant for critical clues. These are the exact carriers cyber units rely on to safely move computers, mobile phones, and storage drives while ensuring the enclosed information stays perfectly intact. Seeing one of those boxes silently screams that a person's complete online existence has officially fallen into the hands of government agents. Every gadget belonging to Tomaso Tioni had been taken away, sending his entire virtual footprint straight to a tech analysis facility. Meanwhile, the underlying suspicion that had been brewing since Nancy vanished had finally reached a deafening roar. What in the world were the authorities expecting to uncover in there? Every major criminal probe eventually hits a turning point where the inner workings of the police suddenly step out of the shadows. It is that exact second when the behind-the-scenes grinding of investigators and lab techs erupts into public view for the whole nation to witness. Whether through a media briefing, yellow crime scene barriers, or a fleet of squad cars rolling up to a neighborhood home right in the middle of the day while news crews film from the curb. In the mystery surrounding Nancy Guthrie, this pivot happened on 2 separate occasions. The initial instance was February 5th. The follow-up hit on February 7th. In the time frame bridging those days, the entire trajectory of the inquiry changed course, a pivot that public documents barely touch upon, while the actual physical evidence hauled out of that residence leaves behind lingering mysteries that remain completely unexplained to the masses. We need to break down both of those property sweeps step by step, simply because the underlying facts carry far more weight than the visual spectacle. On February 5th, 2026, just 4 days following the vanishing of Nancy Guthrie, Local deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Agency served a legal inspection order at the Tucson house belonging to Tomaso Tioni and Nancy Guthrie. A sitting magistrate had personally looked over and greenlit the document, which meant that barely 4 days after she went missing, detectives had successfully compiled sufficient hard evidence to persuade a legal official that raiding this exact address was completely lawful and necessary. You cannot understate the gravity of that. Magistrates never hand out these authorizations just because the police put in a polite request. The only way they give approval is if detectives lay out clear, written proof suggesting that materials linked to an offense are hidden inside the premises. Officers stepped through the front door, hands covered in protective medical gear. They navigated the space with calculated, step-by-step precision. Cameras flashed across all the living areas, capturing countertops, floors, and anything that might hold a clue. The crew remained indoors for a massive chunk of the day. All the while, broadcast crews stayed planted right on the edge of the street. And the clips broadcast across the country later that night painted a picture of a property being handled like an active felony investigation site, rather than a sanctuary for heartbroken relatives. Online sleuths wasted zero time waiting for the facts. Mere hours after the broadcast hit televisions, message board users were busy comparing Tomaso Tioni's social media pictures with the security video showing the disguised perpetrator. They analyzed how tall he stood, his body type, the way he carried himself, and the shadowy stubble poking out from the bottom of the face covering right along his chin. Web users threw digital sharpening tools over still images, while others slapped size comparison grids onto the frames. The court of public opinion was operating at full speed, rendering guilty verdicts without bothering to review a single piece of verified proof. Then February 7th rolled around. A mere 2 days following their initial sweep, the police showed back up to that exact same house carrying another set of legal paperwork. Right from the jump, the vibe of this second visit was noticeably heavier. Officers had strapped their protective gear right back on, sweeping the residence with that familiar, calculated thoroughness. Except now, they stayed inside significantly longer. They took way more exhaustive records, and the items they eventually carried out the door painted an incredibly clear picture of what was happening. They brought out several heavy-duty paper sacks, the go-to method for keeping physical clues safe from outside tampering. But the one item that completely flipped the public narrative was a highly distinct metallic lockbox. It was the exact type of gear utilized solely by tech-focused police divisions, the sort of specialized carrier built explicitly for moving personal electronics. Internal storage disks, portable computers, handheld screens, and cell phones, while entirely blocking out signals so nobody can erase, tweak, or hack the contents while on the road. Tomaso Tioni's personal tech bubble had officially been swallowed up by the authorities. Every single private message, all of his emails, his entire browser history, the GPS tracking from all the gadgets in the home, plus all the pictures, anything sent to the trash bin, his downloaded programs, and his passwords. The whole digital payload was sitting in a high-tech facility where specialists were pulling the data, organizing it, and scrutinizing it word for word. Should any scrap of information on those screens link him to the incident on February 1st, the authorities were perfectly set up to catch it. Yet 11 days following that intense second raid, on February 16th, the head of the department, Nanos, stepped up to a crowded press podium and dropped a bombshell that absolutely no one following the story saw coming. He officially and definitively ruled Tomaso Tioni out as a suspect. He exonerated Annie. He removed the dark cloud of suspicion from the entirety of Nancy Guthrie's close relatives, explicitly referring to the family as collateral casualties. Staring dead on into the lenses, he made an absolute, unbending statement. The loved ones left behind had been dragged through the mud with vicious, completely unfounded rumors during what was already the darkest, most agonizing chapter they had ever faced. He looked right at the press and demanded they handle the story truthfully and with some basic human decency. Online chatter died down for a bit, but people quickly pivoted to bickering over the next trending topic. Still, letting them off the hook leaves a massive blind spot, and the hard data from this case presents an unavoidable deeply unsettling problem that you simply cannot ignore. Assuming Tomaso Tioni and the Guthrie relatives were destined to be ruled out as suspects, and assuming detectives found zero proof tying them to NY vanishing, what explains the need for a pair of distinct search warrants? The confiscation of numerous gadgets, along with 11 straight days of intense lab testing just to reach that verdict. You can trace the reasoning back to a historic 1995 Supreme Court decision known as Kiles v. Whitley. That specific judgment laid the groundwork for how criminal trials operate in this country, guaranteeing a lawyer representing the accused holds the constitutional power to claim the police ran a sloppy or partial inquiry. Essentially, should detectives brush past glaring clues, neglect to scrutinize the family, or cut corners right out of the gate, the defense gets to leverage those mistakes to undermine the state's entire argument for the jury. Pima County deputies refused to hand any future trial lawyer that kind of ammunition, which is exactly why they carried out 2 comprehensive property sweeps, bagged up electronics, and spent hours combing through that residence with gloves and collection kits right in front of the local news crews, before spending 11 days putting those computers and phones through rigorous lab analysis prior to publicly clearing them. What they constructed was an impenetrable fortress for the prosecution, effectively blocking any future courtroom counterattacks. The moment the real culprit behind this incident is finally caught and faces a judge, law enforcement can stand before the jurors and declare, "We turned the family inside out," checking every single detail using every piece of tech we had. We looked under every rock and totally exonerated them, ensuring no attorney alive could claim we missed the easy targets. However, a lingering detail remains. There is one major gap that this courtroom strategy completely fails to explain. Cops do not haul metallic evidence cases off to a tech lab unless at that exact second they genuinely suspect those hard drives contain critical secrets. Ultimately, we are not wondering if the raids were a smart legal maneuver, because they absolutely were. The real mystery is figuring out what detectives noticed, or assumed they noticed, during that 11-day stretch that caused them to double back. Authorities have kept that detail completely under wraps, but everything in this case revolves around a specific figure. We are not talking about a suspect, a crime scene, or a tangible clue you can bag up or hit with a blacklight. The figure is 41, and once you grasp its true meaning and what it eliminates, it completely shreds the theory of an expert abduction faster than anything found inside the home. We need to construct the sequence of events from scratch, since the importance of that 41-minute gap only makes sense if you review the electronic footprint of that evening chronologically, step by step. On January 31st, 2026, at exactly 9:48 p.m., Tomaso Tioni arrives outside Nancy Guthrie's place in the Catalina foothills. After making sure she is home, the garage shuts at 9:50 p.m., a time that is not based on guesswork or a random witness memory. The automatic opener's internal software permanently hard-coded that exact moment into its memory. 9:50 p.m. hits, the bay is shut. Nancy is indoors, and the location is locked down tight, leading to hours of absolute dead air with zero security pings. Lenses stay asleep. The network remains untouched, and the residence stays completely silent from late night past midnight, right into the deepest, quietest part of the morning up in the foothills, surrounded by the dark desert and completely abandoned roads. The clock hits roughly 2:12 a.m. That is when the porch camera's motion detector picks up movement near the entryway, serving as the initial electronic warning that someone is advancing on the property. Video starts rolling until 1:47 a.m. arrives. Based on the hard-coded log pulled directly from the surveillance network's hidden files, right before the equipment gets ripped off the wall, a silhouette steps into view, walks right up to the glass, and cuts the power by hand. The feed goes black, plunging the property into a total blackout with zero footage. No electronic overwatch, leaving just a one-story desert house and whatever nightmare is unfolding indoors. Then, precisely at 2:28 a.m., the health tracking software on Nancy Guthrie's smartphone loses its wireless pairing, the link bridging her heart monitor and her mobile device. which had been beaming her vital signs flawlessly all night long, suddenly snaps. The system generates an automatic error code at 2:28 a.m., marking a complete blackout from 1:47 a.m. to 2:28 a.m., leaving a gap of 41 minutes, which completely shatters the entire leading theory. When you are dealing with an organized kidnapping, the very angle that all the big networks ran with during the initial 72 hours, moving fast is not just a bonus. It is the core of the whole job. An elite squad targeting someone with physical disabilities who cannot fight back will not casually hang around. Their only goal is to kick the door in, grab the victim, and vanish. Taking down a person incapable of fleeing or defending themselves ought to require a maximum of 3 to 5 minutes from breaching the front door to driving away unnoticed. We aren't just guessing here. This is exactly how planned kidnappings play out in the real world. All the case files, crime scene data, and psychological profiles pulled together by the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Violent Crimes Division tell the exact same story. Moving fast keeps you alive. Hanging around a target's home just increases the chances of getting caught. That's extra time for someone's security light to trip down the street, or for the folks next door to wake up and flip on a bedroom lamp. It gives chaos a chance to ruin the entire plan. Yet, this intruder hung around for 41 minutes. Imagine standing in the pitch black of a stranger's home for that long. It isn't a quick in and out. You aren't just taking a quick look around. 41 minutes gives you plenty of time to thoroughly sweep through a typical one-story house 2 completely separate times. That leaves enough room to rummage through dressers, check wardrobes, sift through paperwork, and even crack a lockbox. Honestly, you could practically make a whole dinner in that time frame. Or, if the whole thing went sideways the second they walked inside, it's more than enough time to scramble and deal with an absolute disaster they hadn't prepped for. Detectives keep circling back to that exact scenario. After breaking down the timeline, experts have zeroed in on 3 possible explanations. Option 1 involves teamwork. The individual standing in the dark was holding out for a cue, maybe a getaway car running late, an accomplice, or the green light that the coast was clear. Assuming multiple people were involved, those 41 minutes might have just been dead time, with the suspect guarding Nancy until the getaway crew was ready to roll. The second idea focuses on a break-in. Taking Nancy wasn't the main goal at all. The intruder wanted something specific: paperwork, a lockbox, money, something that took a while to hunt down by flashlight. Under this scenario, Nancy just happened to get in the way or became an afterthought. Then there's the third angle, which the feds are playing extremely close to the vest right now. However, the forensic clues pulled straight from the entryway strongly suggest this exact outcome. Whatever they mapped out completely fell apart once they crossed the threshold. Things went south the very second they stepped inside. So, those 41 minutes weren't spent executing a mission or killing time. That was panic mode. It was the time needed to clean up a giant mess because the whole operation had already flown entirely off the rails. Think about that idea alongside this piece of evidence: the DNA left right by the front door of the property, which the crime lab conclusively matched to Nancy Guthrie, was found right on the mat, not further back in the residence. It marks the exact spot where the intruder and the person walking in crossed paths. Finding it there is huge. It proves to the cops that whatever actually went down on the night of February 1st, the main struggle didn't occur down the hall or in the master's suite. The confrontation took place the split second that door swung open. You don't see that when a kidnapping goes off without a hitch. You see that when an ambush hits a massive roadblock before it even really begins, and those next 41 minutes definitely don't look like a polished crew pulling off a flawless job. That's 41 minutes of a lone suspect in the pitch black, frantically doing damage control after a major screw-up. So, think about this for a second. Put yourself in Tomaso Tioni's shoes. The clock says 9:50 at night. You just saw the garage shut as your mother-in-law arrived. You know her daily habits. You know when she takes her pills. You're fully aware of where she keeps her cell, what devices it connects to, and the exact second it's going to log a dropped wireless connection. You've memorized the security setup, and you're familiar with the whole street. If you hired a guy to hit that place late at night, when exactly would you tell him to show up? And how much of a window would you give him before the smart home data began creating an alibi you couldn't manipulate? Exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes after that door rolled down, a suspect showed up. That wasn't just a random occurrence. That was math. And the one guy holding all the puzzle pieces required to figure that out. The man who understood every single moving part, every data log, and every hidden camera, had rolled out of that driveway at 9:50 at night with the entire blueprint memorized. Fast forward to February 10th, 2026, when federal agents finally shared the porch camera video with the press. They didn't have the original clip since the intruder literally ripped it out of the machine on February 1st and took it with them, along with whatever else they stole during that 41-minute gap. Instead, the feds managed to salvage leftover files buried deep in the cloud storage of the security system. Little pieces, half images, just enough to stitch together a timeline so the public could see what detectives had been analyzing nonstop since day one. Sir, the video quality is pretty terrible. It's super blurry. Just like your typical home security setup, good enough to tell that a guy is standing there, but way too pixelated to make out a face. Bad quality doesn't mean it's worthless, though, especially not when you put it in front of a professional profiler. Yet, the federal behavior experts and investigative psychologists poring over this evidence since February 1st saw things differently. They scrubbed the video with advanced filters, dropped the playback speed to a crawl, and pulled apart every single image. Applying their highly specialized training meant ignoring the search for an identity and focusing entirely on the suspect's movements. Ultimately, the insights pulled from those clips, evaluating the subtle actions of whoever crept onto Nancy Guthrie's steps at 1:47 in the morning, painted a picture that was anything but expert. The vibe was totally different. It felt intimate, driven by an obsessive yet misguided level of planning. As investigators dug deeper, the clues kept pointing, with laser precision, to an absolute amateur who had dumped massive amounts of time into getting ready for this moment. Just looking at the outfit reveals a wild story. You can clearly see the intruder buried under several bulky jackets piled on simultaneously. Nobody bundles up like this just to beat a chill in the air. Winter nights in the Tucson desert only dip down into the low 40s, chilly enough to throw on a coat. Sure, but nowhere near freezing enough to justify this ridiculous amount of padding. These garments were stiff and heavy, completely changing the person's outline to make them look way broader than they actually were. The whole point was to intentionally warp their physique and hide any real anatomical shapes. By drowning their shoulders, chest, and arms in cloth, they successfully neutralized any chance for crime lab technicians to estimate their actual build. You do not just throw that together on a whim. That takes premeditation. A balaclava is standard gear here. Anybody who watches crime shows knows to hide their identity from the cameras. However, staring intently at the screen reveals a bizarre detail. The experts spotted what looked like another mask tucked directly underneath the main winter hood. This meant extra fabric was gripping their jaw, creating a backup wall just to guarantee zero sweat or DNA could possibly transfer to the environment. Doubling up on headgear was matched by doubling up on handwear. He shoved his hands inside overlapping sets of gloves. Consider the actual physical demands of a break-in like this. Disabling a security feed requires nimble fingers to feel around for tiny wires or hidden switches blindly above a doorway. Furthermore, you have to pick a lock, force a door, and physically subdue a resident, making your grip the single most crucial asset you have. Agility, rapid reflex, and delicate finger coordination are absolutely essential for pulling this off. Wearing double gloves completely ruins any chance of nimbleness, effectively numbing your sense of touch. It basically turns capable fingers into useless, fumbling paws that cannot work efficiently. A seasoned thief would never handicap themselves like that. A single set blocks fingerprints just fine. Stacking two is not standard tradecraft. It is an act of pure paranoia. Catching that exact difference between seasoned efficiency and obsessive anxiety is what made the experts sit up in their chairs. An experienced crook only takes enough safety measures to get the job done smoothly, then stops overthinking it. Rocking a double mask, stacked hand protection, and an artificial fat suit made of coats. None of that points to a veteran burglar who understands the sweet spot of leaving no trace. Rather, it screams of a suspect paralyzed by a deep, intimate dread of being tied to this exact house and this specific target. You do not get that kind of panic from the standard risk of going to jail. Lifetime felons know the cops are always after them, but they compartmentalize that threat into a cold, everyday business calculation. This intense fright stems from an existing close relationship. It is the fear of knowing detectives naturally interrogate the inner circle before anyone else. It is understanding that one stray thread, half a smudge on a window pane, or an invisible drop of sweat will not just prove you are in the house, but completely highlight your underlying link to the victim situated at the core of the chaos. Nobody stacks winter gloves just to beat a dusting brush. You do it because you are acutely aware your name is right at the top of the suspect list. Moving on to the weapon, we see a pistol shoved casually down the front of the intruder's jeans without a clip, strap, or proper carrying rig whatsoever. Anybody who actually shoots for a living will tell you that stuffing a naked gun into your belt is not a valid technique. It is a phenomenal way to shoot yourself by mistake. The setup is sloppy, highly risky for the user, and goes against every single rule taught in basic marksmanship classes. Cops lock their sidearms in place. Bodyguards secure their weapons properly. Hardened gang members use the right gear too. Simply because a gun slipping down a pant leg, tumbling to the floor, or going off unexpectedly will ruin a hit job quicker than the police showing up. Yet, this guy just wedged his piece awkwardly against his stomach where it could easily slide around. You would never catch a hired gun carrying like that. That tells the story of a rookie who bought a piece exclusively for this mission and had zero clue how to actually walk around with it hidden. They carried the firearm more like a costume piece than a weapon. It was all about creating an illusion of power. Rather than showing any actual tactical proficiency, Federal Bureau of Investigation profilers studied the tape and arrived at a theory that completely flipped the trajectory of the probe. Whoever stood on those steps definitely was not a paid hitman, nor were they a seasoned underworld operative with prior experience in this kind of job. The figure caught on camera was clearly driven by an intimate, deep-rooted grudge. This was an individual who had a very particular motive for showing up at that exact address during that precise evening looking for that exact victim. It was an acquaintance of Nancy Guthrie, and that identity perfectly matched the prime suspect authorities had already prioritized. The primary individual implicated by the chronological forensic data, the electronic trails, the psychological profiling, and both property raids remained exactly the same as it had been from the very first day of the inquiry. Ahead, we explore extortion threats designed to fail from the start. We will examine the monetary blueprint of an abduction engineered solely to weave a fictional narrative, rather than actually secure cash. Plus, we reveal the hidden clue within those messages that tipped off federal agents to the true nature of the scheme in less than 48 hours. All extortion ultimatums, throughout the annals of recorded abduction investigations, share a single unifying trait. There is a fundamental cornerstone that shapes the whole plot and distinguishes genuine blackmail from a mere facade. That absolute necessity is consistent engagement. Captors seeking a payday always keep the lines of communication open. They establish a ticking clock and make sure you feel the pressure. Perpetrators offer evidence that their hostage is still breathing. Whenever families beg for confirmation, the perpetrators answer back. They haggle. They exert force. Abductors remain at the bargaining table because talking is their sole source of power. Going totally quiet simply does not work as a bargaining strategy. A lack of communication means the plan has collapsed, unless it was entirely intentional from the get-go. Regarding the Nancy Guthrie tragedy, the extortion messages that emerged right after she vanished looked exactly like a textbook celebrity hostage situation at first glance. Massive payouts, digital coin transfers, strict cutoffs, all utilizing the jargon of a sophisticated underworld syndicate, asking for an absolute fortune from a heavily spotlighted household. Savannah Guthrie stands as a highly prominent figure within the national media landscape. The initial theory, which tabloids instantly splashed across front pages, suggested Nancy was grabbed specifically due to her high-profile daughter, painting the crime as a meticulously orchestrated grab aimed at draining the wealth of a celebrity relative. Yet, as federal detectives thoroughly analyzed the underlying framework of those messages, ignoring the superficial wording, looking past the monetary requests, and focusing on the logistical execution. The evidence completely lacked the hallmarks of a legitimate hostage-for-profit enterprise. It felt entirely staged, especially when the initial ultimatums dropped shortly after Nancy first went missing. Demands for digital assets stretching into the millions of dollars featured directions that lacked crucial clarity, while bizarrely overcomplicating things that usually require wiggle room. Legitimate extortion acts as a dialogue. The perpetrators weave flexibility into the plot, giving relatives space to react, pose inquiries, demand authentication, and initiate the slow, complex procedure of funneling vast sums of cash through intricate banking pathways. Experienced abductors intentionally create that buffer zone, since they require the victim's loved ones to remain somewhat level-headed and willing to play ball. A hysterical, devastated household stripped of all rational thought simply cannot figure out how to wire millions of dollars in Bitcoin. The threats in this case offered absolutely zero breathing space. Cutoff times eventually came and went without a trace. The captors never reached out again, completely ignoring the relatives' desperate efforts to establish a dialogue. The senders refused to verify the victim's status. They withheld audio clips, pictures, or any credible indication whatsoever that Nancy Guthrie survived and remained under their control. During authentic hostage situations, confirming the captive's well-being is mandatory. It acts as the core exchange anchoring the whole scheme. Where the captor demonstrates the target still breathes, relatives authenticate the evidence, allowing the bartering to move forward. If the perpetrators refuse to show the victim is breathing, all discussions immediately break down. The trail goes completely cold. Yet, investigators never received a shred of evidence confirming her survival. By February 7th, Savannah Guthrie broadcasted an on-camera plea that racked up viewership in the millions of people mere hours after going live, staring straight down the lens with a steady tone and carefully chosen phrasing. She delivered the exact message you would expect from a desperate child. Her relatives were perfectly willing to hand over the cash to get their mom home safely. She pleaded for the captors to reach out, but received nothing but absolute quiet in return. Another ultimatum eventually popped up, demanding $6 million and setting a strict countdown for February 9th. Her loved ones prepared themselves to negotiate. Law enforcement agents kept a close eye on all communication lines. They traced every single electronic avenue capable of receiving an incoming reply. February 9th ultimately rolled around. The countdown expired without a single peep from the anonymous extortionist. At this point, the probe took a massive detour that flew completely under the media radar. Right on February 5th, coinciding with the initial property raid at Tomaso Tioni's home, government agents operating out of California placed a suspect in handcuffs for allegedly sending bogus extortion threats to the victim's loved ones. This guy lacked any real ties to Nancy's vanishing act. He was simply a grifter looking to cash in after catching the tragedy on television, targeted a prominent family in mourning, and built a fake blackmail plot aimed at squeezing cash out of relatives so frantic they would hand over whatever it took to bring their mom home. Authorities took him into custody and indicted him, which ended up shedding light on a crucial detail. The ransom notes sent to the Guthries did not all originate from one person. A few turned out to be complete fakes. This illegal interference piled onto an already complicated case, burying the real leads and creating huge headaches for detectives trying to figure out if any of the messages were actually real. However, taking that California suspect down left a major question unanswered. It failed to explain the glaring flaws in the ransom notes that federal agents firmly linked to the real abduction. The total lack of any proof that the victim was still alive. Just look at the time limits that expired without a word. Not a single message followed up after the $6 million request just faded away into nothing. The feds ultimately came to a realization regarding those particular letters, something they have never completely shared with the public. You can spot the shape of their theory right there in the evidence files, provided you know where to search. The letters tied to this crime were never actually meant to trigger a payout. Securing cash was never the goal. Instead, they were crafted to simply give the illusion of a cash grab. Those two concepts are completely worlds apart. Spotting that distinction reveals a whole lot about the exact type of person who drafted the notes. Career hostage takers set up their requests to win, to seal the deal, and to guarantee the funds actually change hands. A person faking an abduction writes notes meant for an audience, aiming to spin a tall tale, send the cops on a wild goose chase, and stall for time. And think about whoever benefits the most when detectives waste those vital early days hunting down crypto transfers and blown ultimatums. Instead of digging into the physical evidence and that unexplained 41-minute window, that individual could not care less if the extortion attempt actually worked. They simply needed the letters out there. You see, any given crime scene always spins a pair of tails. Tale number one is exactly what the bad guy wants everyone to see. The meticulously crafted illusion where clues are propped up and scattered to trick detectives into believing a certain theory. The alternative narrative is the one that the culprit never meant to drop at all, the tiny, totally unintentional, and strictly biological traces. It is a narrative spun entirely through whatever material accidentally falls off, completely unnoticed, entirely out of the suspect's hands, and impossible for them to ever wipe away. When it came to Nancy Guthrie, that hidden narrative showed up in her genetic markers from the very start of the hunt. Crime scene technicians from the Pima County Sheriff's Office, along with federal agents over at Nancy's place in the Catalina foothills, were gathering up physical samples, running cotton applicators over countertops, tossing belongings into evidence bags, and thoroughly dusting the main doorway, the inside entryway, and practically any spot that their timeline indicated saw action over the course of that crucial 41-minute gap. Those physical samples pulled right from the main entryway were quickly matched to Nancy, which instantly proved that the whole nightmare kicked off right at the front door, rather than further back inside the house. Detectives, however, needed to find a whole lot more than just the victim's personal DNA. They were hunting for traces of the intruder who actually stood inside those walls alongside her. Then, roughly 2 miles down the road from the Guthrie property, cops stumbled across a glove, just one lone glove, tossed aside exactly the way things get dropped when a person is in a massive hurry. It happens when a suspect's heart is practically beating out of their chest, and their only real goal is getting as far away as possible rather than covering their tracks. That piece of evidence was scooped up, sealed away, and shipped off to the crime lab. Technicians managed to pull genetic material right out of the inner fabric, the exact part rubbing up against the bare hands of the suspect. They tossed those results straight into the combined DNA index system, commonly known as CODIS. That is the massive federal registry packed with genetic files from known felons, folks who have been booked, and physical clues scooped up from crime scenes nationwide. If the guy wearing that item had ever brushed up against law enforcement anywhere on a local or national scale, the database was guaranteed to flag it, except the system came back completely empty. That genetic code simply did not match a single soul in their records. The individual slipping on that handwear had zero arrest history that would have put their spit or blood on file. To the technicians handling the case, they were basically a ghost leaving obvious clues behind, yet completely missing from the government network. With their backs against the wall, detectives shifted gears to a strategy known as investigative genetic genealogy. It is the exact same game plan that finally brought down the Golden State Killer back in 2018. This method grabs an unidentified genetic sample and hunts for matches outside the usual police networks, leaning heavily on everyday family tree websites instead, diving into heritage platforms and the family charts everyday people build, along with that huge online collection of folks just willingly mailing in their spit to learn about their roots, all to hunt down long-lost cousins of the mystery suspect. We are talking third cousins, fourth cousins, anyone whose DNA overlaps just enough to prove they share a spot on the exact same family tree. Detectives map out broad ancestral lines first, eventually narrowing the branches until they pinpoint the exact person tied to the genetic sample. In the hunt for Nancy Guthrie, that exact technique finally generated a solid clue. Genetic material pulled from the handwear pointed straight to a staff member at a nearby eatery. A guy who lacked any obvious ties to Nancy Guthrie, showed zero links to Tomaso Tioni, and possessed no underlying relationship with the broader family that authorities could spot right off the bat. The county sheriff openly acknowledged this, verifying the suspect's employment background. Law enforcement leadership also noted that they had tracked down and questioned this subject. But then officials dropped another detail. throwing a massive curveball into a crime scene puzzle that was already notoriously difficult. The genetic footprint left on that fabric wasn't a pristine, isolated match. It was a blend, indicating multiple individuals had left their physical trace on the inside lining. While the bulk of the genetic signature belonged to the food service employee, the remaining biological fragments mingled within that evidence hadn't yielded a full, recognizable read. For crime lab specialists, sorting out intertwined genetic data is incredibly brutal work. Whenever multiple biological identities get fused together in a single swab, the intricate task of untangling those markers and extracting every distinct personal code demands highly advanced chemical testing that eats up the clock and often fails to deliver definitive answers. Consequently, based on the latest briefings from detectives, that backup trace on the fabric remains a frustrating mystery. However, that piece of clothing wasn't the only clue discovered scattered nearby. During the frantic days after the victim vanished, crews scouring the local blocks ended up scooping up 16 distinct sets of hand protection. 16 different sets were scattered widely enough to hint at two possibilities. Either the perpetrator practically rained evidence while fleeing, or the rescue volunteers accidentally tossed their own gear while walking the grid, polluting the crime scene and turning a straightforward analysis into a nightmare. Authorities later admitted that most of those 16 sets belonged straight to emergency responders. Their standard equipment was logged, yet the phrase "the bulk of" carries serious weight here, since it leaves a glaring gap. Whatever failed to match up with official crew manifests sat waiting in the laboratory backlog. Beyond that, a mysterious automobile entered the chat. A security doorbell about 2.5 miles from the property managed to record an automobile cruising the streets at 2:36 a.m. on February 1st, exactly 8 minutes past the moment her heart implant severed its wireless connection at 2:28 a.m. Detectives still haven't released any official details regarding the brand, style, or license plates of that ride. Nobody has justified why it happened to be driving down that exact stretch of road during those early hours. Judging by the latest press releases out of the Pima County authorities, that sedan is still a massive question mark. Between the blended genetics pulled from the fabric and those 16 sets of handwear collected off the pavement, alongside that shadowy ride slipping down the block 8 minutes after the medical device dropped offline, every single one of these clues acts like an isolated string that could potentially lead absolutely nowhere on its own. Yank them all together, though, and the resulting image totally destroys the idea of a slick, expert hit that vanished without a trace. Instead, it points to somebody sprinting away in a sheer panic, dropping physical evidence everywhere, and completely failing to stay concealed despite wearing heavy layers, multiple masks, and redundant gloves. This was an individual who planned for every contingency, yet still managed to leave a blazing path behind them. 6 agonizing weeks. That's exactly how much time has passed since Nancy vanished, bringing us to today, March 15th, 2026. 6 whole weeks since her bay doors shut tight at 9:50 p.m., and an equal amount of time since her security feed was cut at 1:47 a.m. It's been 6 weeks since the medical application registered its very last update, permanently severing the wireless link connecting a frantic daughter to her mom's fading pulse. 6 weeks with absolutely nobody in handcuffs. Now, looking at the grand scope of a massive federal probe, a month and a half isn't really that long. Tricky cases drag on. Processing evidence through the microscope eats up days. Building ancestral trees to track down suspects requires infinite patience. Piecing together a rock-solid timeline that can actually withstand a brutal cross-examination and convince 12 jurors is a painfully slow undertaking. Detectives love to repeat that fact. They'll drop that line whenever a journalist shoves a recorder in their face, demanding to know why a suspect hasn't been booked. However, hitting the 6-week mark when someone is literally unaccounted for hits completely differently. With every sunrise that brings 0 answers, the physical clues out in the elements simply rot away. Bystander recollections get fuzzy. Electronic breadcrumbs dry up, and the already bleak possibility of bringing Nancy home breathing, an outcome that law enforcement secretly admitted was a long shot right out of the gate, slams shut just a little bit more. Sheriff Chris Nanos has stood as the official spokesperson for this whole mess since it kicked off. He's been the guy gripping the microphone at every single media briefing, dodging aggressive inquiries from the press corps, desperate for the kind of solid updates his team simply cannot provide yet. If you cut through the carefully crafted PR language at those media briefings and analyze the hidden investigative details, his words paint a very clear picture of where this probe currently sits. He stated that detectives are confident they understand the motive behind the attack on Nancy, even if they haven't identified the culprit yet. Why does that matter? It's a massive detail. Figuring out the underlying reason before finding the killer indicates that law enforcement has reverse-engineered the entire plot. They completely grasp the rationale behind it. The authorities fully comprehend the attacker's ultimate goal and what drove them to do it. However, what they haven't pulled off just yet, or perhaps are simply keeping under wraps, is tying that motivation to a concrete suspect, using enough hard proof to actually slap cuffs on someone. He also mentioned his suspicion that the attacker might claim another victim. You don't just drop a comment like that lightly. No police chief steps up to a podium to issue a community-wide alert about a dangerous suspect on the loose without having rock-solid intelligence proving the danger is completely legitimate. That kind of caution gives us major clues regarding the psychological assessment they've put together. This wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment attack. It wasn't a coincidence. This was deliberate, premeditated, and carefully pulled off by a person with a distinct, undeniable motive to zero in on Nancy Guthrie specifically over anybody else. He has confirmed that the inquiry is moving forward, noting that the detectives are absolutely narrowing the gap compared to where they started. He's echoed this sentiment time and time again during various media updates, speaking with the cautious poise of someone juggling two conflicting priorities at once: protecting the secrecy of an ongoing case while dealing with a community whose tolerance is rapidly wearing thin. In the meantime, the federal agents relocated their headquarters from Tucson to Phoenix a few weeks after the preliminary physical canvassing wrapped up. A handful of experts interpreted that move to mean an indication that the boots-on-the-ground hunting portion was over, shifting the focus from a rescue mission to an evidence-based, data-driven strategy managed from afar. But the Bureau firmly rejected that kind of speculation. Detectives stood their ground, stressing that the file was still wide open with plenty of manpower assigned to it. A massive bounty totaling between $1.2 and $2 million was pooled together using donations from the Guthrie relatives. Pima County, alongside outside benefactors tracking the story online. That massive cash incentive sparked tens of thousands of leads. And every single submission needs to be vetted, analyzed, double-checked against the physical evidence, and ultimately either pieced into the overall puzzle or completely discarded. This takes a massive amount of time. You're talking about cramming half a year of deep analytical diving into a few short weeks, all handled by a squad already drowning in the pressure of a massive national inquiry. Police brought in a pair of people for interrogation during the weeks right after Nancy vanished. Both ended up walking free with zero charges filed. Authorities never released their names to the press, nor did they label them as actual suspects. And regarding the genetic material, that tangled genetic sequence pulled off the handwear, the mystery secondary source they haven't identified yet, alongside that complex ancestral tracking method quietly churning away in a distant lab somewhere. Those pieces stand as the strongest lingering leads in this whole mess. The sheriff actually stated this publicly while speaking directly to the press corps. He emphasized that the biological evidence will ultimately point them to a suspect. The only mystery is the timeline. But look, the deeper issue here, the exact same puzzle that's haunted this entire search since the security feed cut out on February 1st, revolves around whether that biological trace points to a random attacker or an acquaintance of Nancy Guthrie. So, let's lay out the hard facts. No guesswork. Forget the internet gossip or the sensationalized front pages from those chaotic first 72 hours when the news broke and details were incredibly sketchy. Let's stick strictly to what the official, scientifically backed evidence log really proves. Tomaso Tioni drove Nancy Guthrie back to her house at 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, 2026. He stands as the final confirmed individual to lay eyes on her before she vanished. Exactly 4 hours and 57 minutes after that, a disguised intruder lacking any sort of tactical expertise, hauling around a loosely handled gun while sporting double-layered hand protection and two masks over their face. physically ripped out the security lens at her front door and broke into the property. Her heart monitor's wireless connection flatlined at 2:28 a.m., exactly 41 minutes following the video blackout. Investigators managed to scrape her physical fluid samples right off the main doorway. Detectives located a piece of handwear 2 miles out, with a tangled genetic footprint they haven't fully cracked yet. Furthermore, an unknown car cruised past the scene 8 minutes post-signal drop and remains a ghost. The subsequent extortion letters completely lacked any evidence that she was still breathing, blew past every single time limit, and resulted in total radio silence once the final $6 million ultimatum dropped without a response. No matter how far you trace these clues, they all circle back to identical mysteries. Who studied Nancy's daily habits closely enough to exploit them? Who scoped out the exact security angles? Who had access to her prescription timetable? Who figured out that her bedside cell phone was actively tracking her heart rhythm, fully grasping the precise digital footprint that software would leave the second the connection died? Tomaso Tioni hasn't faced a single indictment. Law enforcement has never officially labeled him as a person of interest. The local deputies fully exonerated both him and his relatives on February 16, 2026, and that absolution remains cemented in the formal case files. Based on whatever information is currently out there for the public to see, there isn't any solid proof that ties him to the crime. However, the physical clues certainly don't prove he was nowhere near the scene. They don't rule out the possibility that he knew exactly what was going on, nor do they eliminate the chance that he knew the layout of the property, or Tian herself, more intimately on that particular evening than any other suspect authorities have looked at during the 6 weeks since Nancy Guthrie vanished. This remains an active investigation. Biological samples are currently being tested, and there is still a $1.2 million bounty for information. You can still reach out to the Bureau's hotline at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Plus, somewhere out there in Tucson, Arizona, buried deep within unanalyzed lab reports, lies the very truth we've been searching for ever since the son-in-law pulled out of the driveway and the garage closed behind him at 9:50 at night. Nancy Guthrie has earned the right to that truth, just like her relatives have. Slowly but surely, the physical evidence is pushing us closer to finding it. Now I want to hear from you guys. We just went over the 5 bizarre pieces of physical evidence, the missing 41 minutes, the extortion plot that was doomed from the start, the cellular material left right at the doorway, as well as the psychological footprint of an offender driven by a personal vendetta, and that ongoing genetic sequence analysis. If you were the primary detective running this show, which of those 5 threads would you start yanking on right away? Go ahead and leave your thoughts down in the comment section below, since our viewers have cracked things in the past. And mysteries like this only unravel when a massive group of folks keeps a watchful eye. If today's deep dive got your gears turning, please send this link to just one friend today, someone who loves true crime mysteries and really zeroes in on the facts. Simply put, the book hasn't been closed on Nancy Guthrie yet. Furthermore, when a massive audience learns the actual facts, the hard science, rather than just the sensationalized news blurbs, it makes it nearly impossible to hide the real story. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for the Case Files Collective if you haven't joined the family yet, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. We are going to be right here the second an arrest happens. Once that day comes, we plan to break down the entire thing step by step, focusing heavily on the science, just like we always do, holding nothing back. It's been 6 weeks since Nancy Guthrie vanished without a trace. The 84-year-old woman relied on a heart monitor that was linked directly to the landline next to her bed. She returned to her residence on a Thursday night and was never seen again. The individual who holds the exact answers about what went down in her home during that 41-minute blackout period is still walking free. We aren't just guessing here. The hard facts point squarely to that conclusion. The shattered illusion. Protecting our most vulnerable. We build our homes in quiet, secluded neighborhoods, trusting the heavy, peaceful silence of the suburbs to protect the people we love most. But as the tragic disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie violently illustrates, the illusion of safety is exactly that, an illusion. Behind locked garage doors and perfectly manicured lawns, our aging parents and grandparents face invisible battles of vulnerability every single day. Nancy was a fierce, sharp-minded woman, yet her physical constraints, a fragile heart relying on a pacemaker and daily medication, made her a heartbreakingly easy target in the dark. We often assume that routine family dinners and quick phone calls are enough to keep our elders secure. This haunting mystery serves as a devastating wake-up call. Routine is not the same as security. True vigilance demands that we look closer. We must fiercely protect who has access to our elders, who studies their daily habits, and who might exploit their deepest physical frailties. Do not let the quiet of your neighborhood lull you into complacency. Fortify their physical safety, secure their digital medical networks, and protect their daily routines just as fiercely as you would protect a child. Because when the cameras go dark, the only thing standing between our vulnerable loved ones and total tragedy is the unbreakable protective net we choose to build around them.